A massive suicide car bomb is triggered in Somalia on the busiest street in the capital. 3 days after going missing, a top Kenyan election official is found dead after being tortured. And a young immigrant returns to Ethiopia to help children. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Heidi Adams-Fitzpatrick. This is Africa 54. Vincent McCory is on assignment. Tonight we begin in Somalia, where it was a deadly weekend. Fighting between Al-Shabaab militants, Somali government troops and African Union peacekeepers killed 24 people early Sunday. Somali forces say Al-Shabaab ambushed a convoy carrying troops from the African Union mission in the country. Uganda's defense ministry says its soldiers were part of that convoy and a number of them died. Meanwhile, at least 10 people were killed and 15 others wounded in a massive suicide car bomb attack in the Somali capital on Sunday. Now, the car was in a line of vehicles on one of Mogadishu's busiest streets. A VOA reporter who went to the scene says the bomber detonated the explosives after being stuck in a traffic jam during intensive stop-and-search operations by security forces. Most of the victims were shoppers who were leaving a supermarket next to the road. A security source says it's believed the ultimate destination for the car used in the attack may have been the parliament, where lawmakers were discussing ongoing constitutional reviews. Meanwhile, the Somali government and the U.S. Africa Command says a senior Al-Shabaab commander behind multiple Mogadishu bombings and assassinations was killed in a U.S. airstrike on Saturday. In neighboring Kenya, the home of the deputy president was the scene of an attack over the weekend. Kenyan police say one of their officers died when a gunman carried out an assault on William Ruto's residence. Ruto and his family were not home at the time of the attack. Kenyan police say the gunman was shot and killed. They say the situation is now under control. Now, police initially said the attacker was armed with a machete. The motive for the attack remains unclear. William Ruto is the running mate of President Uhuru Kenyatta, who is seeking a second term in office in the August 8th election. Well, meanwhile, a top Kenyan election official was found dead on Monday, 3 days after going missing, stirring fears of turmoil before next week's presidential election. Chris Msando, the election board's head of information, communication and technology, was tortured before he died. The election body told journalists without giving further details. Well, joining us via Skype from Nairobi is Africa 54's Vincent McCory. Vincent, good evening.
Good evening, Heidi.
Vincent, what more can you tell us about the death of Chris Msando?
Well, the death is come as a shock to most Kenyans, and many had been wondering where he was because he went missing. It was reported missing by Sunday yesterday, and reports were that his car had been found somewhere. And then later on now, reports come to indicate that he's actually dead, and finally it was confirmed that his body was somewhere way far from where the car was found. So it's a shocking thing to many Kenyans, given that he was a man who was holding a very critical position in the Electoral Commission. He was handling the IT systems that are mostly responsible for ensuring that the election results will be transmitted without being compromised. This is the guy who was supposed to take care of that. And then today was supposed to be a day he was supposed to be conducting a dry run of those systems to make sure that the elections will be conducted in a free and fair fashion. So most Kenyans are so confused about why this has happened, and at this particular time, who killed Mr. Msando? That is a question in the minds of everybody. So far, no leads, nobody has been arrested, and the police say they're still investigating.
Well, looking at, Msando's death and, of course, that attack on the deputy president's home, of course, all of these events must be casting a long shadow over the country. What is the mood in the Kenyan capital, especially as the August 8th election approaches?
Of course, a lot is going on. People are speculating all sorts of things. As regards the attack on the vice president's home, some are even skeptical, really, about what the nature of the attack. There are those who have even suggested that it was stage managed to kind of distract from important issues, or even perhaps to create a precedent for further attacks, perhaps on the homes of the opposition candidates. It doesn't make a lot of sense, given that it was one person with a machete who managed to hold off very heavily armed security personnel for about 19 hours. It does not make sense to a majority of Kenyans. And then there are all sorts of speculations around why that could have happened at this time. But again, all the same, all that said, the question is, why are all these things happening around the election time when it's just a few days to the election? It is fueling a lot of speculation. People can't stop talking about these things, but nobody has a clear answer. Nobody has a clear idea as to why all these things are happening.
Well, all the speculation and confusion is totally understandable, but in terms of more serious ramifications, do these events spark fears of a possible scheme to rig the election and in turn the spectre of election violence?
Most certainly, because remember, for days now, even if not months, many have been speculating that there's a scheme to rig the elections and that there will be so many acts and actions that may be used to rig the elections. And as a consequence, if there's a rigged election, you can be sure that there will be a recipe for violence soon after the election. Now, to see the killing of a person that is very close to the electoral process, of course, gives many people a sense that that is a confirmation that there is some scheme. There is some scheme to steal this election, to mess up with them in some way. And the fear is, if that perception stays and the election goes the other way, the government in power wins the election, what will be the reaction? Will the opposition accept the results? Now that they have said they will only accept the results if they're free and fair. If there is a perception that there is interference, there is a scheme, of course, that creates a lot of fear among Kenyans. And many have actually left this city, try to get as far away as they can from the center of where they believe there's going to be a lot of action.
Well, a lot of questions in Kenya tonight, just over a week before the elections. Vincent Makori joining us live via Skype from Nairobi, Kenya. Vincent, thank you very much. Africa is one of the most heavily impacted regions of the world for modern slavery. But one trafficking hotspot country is beginning to turn the tide, Ghana. A US-funded program is rescuing children from dangerous enslavement on fishing boats. Teams are identifying the key reasons parents send their children to the boats and then helping entire communities overcome those problems in order to prevent more child trafficking. I spoke to Johar Brima, Free the Slaves Country Director in Ghana, and asked him what the conditions are like for enslaved children on the boats.
They are often, of course, not with their parents, but with all these strangers who they call masters. Often these children work from dusk to dawn with little food and no supervision by any adult. So often you'll find them in the boat, either paddling the boat, drawing nets, diving under water to untangle nets. They don't have any access to education or health care. Both verbal and physical abuse is very rampant. And you can often see a lot of physical scars on these children who work on the lake.
Why is child trafficking happening?
The major causative factor is poverty, which is both a cause and a consequence of trafficking. The extreme poverty of parents, lead them to a lot of vulnerabilities, and traffickers and other extended family members prey on these vulnerabilities of the families. And of course, also we have the normal African or Ghanaian tradition of your parents helping you to take care of your children, other family members, be they extended or nuclear family members helping you to take care of your children. But over the years, this system has been abused. And so extended family members may approach a family member and say, "Can I have your child to stay with me? The child will go to school, I'll help you take care of the child." But often they will send these children over the lake and refuse to put them in school, instead engage them in forced labor. And then also you have the political aspect to it where the weak enforcement of laws and policies and the lack of prosecution and punishment of perpetrators is sort of giving way for this practice to happen.
What is the U.S. Child Protection Compact with Ghana?
The Child Protection Compact is a unique partnership that is signed between the U.S. government and the government of Ghana. I think it's the first of its kind, signed in June 2015, with the main goal of developing a holistic program aimed at eradicating child trafficking or bringing it to the barest minimum through a unique partnership between civil society and government, specific government ministries and departments, to strengthen a system that will lead to rescue, rehabilitation, and effective reintegration of children, as well as strengthening the systems to prosecute traffickers.
Tell me a little bit about how you're helping families and communities and the Ghanaian government overcome modern slavery.
Free the Slaves have a community abolition model, which we use in eradicating slavery from one community to the other. And this model is pretty much based on strengthening community existing structures and systems to effectively combat trafficking in the communities. Our approach also involves a lot of capacity building of government agencies to effectively respond to the need of community members. So this bridges the gap and mistrust between community members and government agencies, so they are able to effectively serve them. So the emphasis on the approach is at the community level to raise awareness through different strategies, whilst also advocating with government to provide special social protection services for victims and survivors of trafficking.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover here. You can join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and do check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, Russia vows further retaliation if the US moves forward with sanctions. We'll have details after the break.
I'm Jeff Selden, and I work the National Security Beat. National Security Beat is anything that affects the national security of the United States, from counterterrorism to surveillance to even relations with Russia. It's one of the most fascinating beats you can have. It's probably one of the more important beats that you can cover because it touches on so many areas of the world, so many areas of people's day-to-day lives. I'm Jeff Selden, and my beat is national security.
I'm Millar Sega. I'm the host of VOA's The Correspondents, a roundup of the world's top stories with analysis from our dedicated reporters. It's really a conversation the same way that you would bring a friend to your home and ask them what's going on. And our correspondents will do that and answer those questions through their own eyes.
That appears a false choice in more ways than one.
We can't actually put you there, but we can come pretty close. In 30 minutes, we'll show you the world.
Welcome back. Russian President Vladimir Putin is ordering the United States to cut its diplomatic staff in Russia by 755 people. That's in response to new U.S. sanctions imposed over Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election. Now, the U.S. State Department called Putin's order, quote, a regrettable and uncalled for act, and says it is assessing its response. Putin told a Russian television network that his government could take further steps against the United States. The U.S. Congress approved the new sanctions last Thursday in a package that also included measures against Iran and North Korea. Russia's foreign ministry first announced the countermeasures last Friday, saying the sanctions confirm the, quote, extreme aggression of the U.S. in international affairs. The ministry says the staff cuts will need to be completed by the end of August. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump is expected to sign into law those new sanctions against Russia, Iran and North Korea. VOA's Michael Bowman reports from Washington.
The yeas are 98, the nays are 2. The bill is passed. The sanctions bill spawned a rarity in Congress, genuine, overwhelming bipartisanship.
We will not tolerate attacks on our democracy. That's what this bill is all about.
The sanctions target vast swaths of Russian President Vladimir Putin's power base.
Mandatory sanctions are included in this legislation in regards to the energy sector, the financial sector, intelligence and defense sector.
A completely weird and unacceptable piece of legislation. We will retaliate. Don't do this.
Moscow has ordered a reduction of U.S. diplomatic personnel in Russia. The deputy foreign minister says Russia was in contact with people close to President Trump last year, as were many countries, but that nothing improper took place.
If Ambassador Kislyak was not contacting some people on the other side, so to say, he wouldn't perform his functions as he should. He was not spying and he was not recruiting. If he did so, I would be now a prima ballerina of the Bolshoi Ballet.
Such assertions fall on deaf ears on Capitol Hill.
Mr. Putin and his allies have not suffered serious repercussions for this stunning breach of our right as a sovereign nation not to have our elections disturbed by a foreign capital. That all changes today.
The sanctions also target North Korea after its latest missile launch.
We have more work to do to stop the crazed Kim regime. In China, there are over 5,000 businesses still doing business with North Korea. China's responsible for 90% of the North Korean economy.
Iran is also targeted for non-nuclear activities, including its ballistic missile program and support for international terrorism. Michael Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
Securing petrochemical plants and keeping chemicals out of the hands of terrorists were the key topics of discussion at a recent Chemical Sector Security Summit in Houston, Texas. Security experts say countries that are producing chemicals are changing, and that's one of the many reasons why developed and developing nations need to share best security practices. VOA's Elizabeth Lee reports from Houston, a petrochemical hub in the United States.
From the freeway, these skyscrapers on the east side of Houston are clearly visible. They are not buildings, but chemical plants that reflect one of the most significant industries in the city.
Houston, here in Texas, is the in many ways the center of the petrochemical industry universe in the United States.
Dave Wolf of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security says Houston's economic engine is also a security risk.
We see terrorists globally continuing to seek out and actually use chemicals of the sort. They are using these in improvised explosives devices, among other things.
Wolf says the attack at Brussels Airport and metro station last year is an example of terrorists acquiring chemicals to harm people.
Our challenge is always be one step ahead, understanding what technology is coming, what's here, and then what do we do to mitigate any of those threats or risk.
Security experts say meetings such as this of key players in the chemical industry are crucial to share best practices and build a global culture of chemical security.
No state can afford to ignore chemical security. States that have done so often find that they regret that decision later.
Chemical production had traditionally been confined to developed countries such as the U.S. and in Europe. China, India, and others are now important producers.
Enormous production is going to happen in Iran.
Christoph Patori with the International Center for Chemical Safety and Security warns developing countries need to tighten security standards.
If you want to go global, you have to apply the best standards, and the best standards were developed in the developed countries, and especially in the United States.
Having a good security plan is key, experts say, because chemical facilities hold symbolic value and economic significance, becoming real targets for terrorists. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News, Houston.
According to a recent study, an examination of the brains of more than 100 deceased American football players shows that all but one of them have had a degenerative brain disease believed to be caused by repeated blows to the head. Scientists say even when it looks mild, a concussion can still have severe effects, so prompt diagnosis and treatment are crucial. VOA's George Putic talks with a neurosurgeon who treats many victims of concussion.
For many years, neurosurgeons treating patients with brain injuries were focused on those in a coma, while concussions were treated as a milder injury. During the past 10 to 15 years, research on head injuries has accelerated because of heightened awareness about the long-term consequences of concussions suffered by soldiers, athletes, and traffic accident victims. The clinical director of the Brain Trauma Research Center at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, Dr. David Okonkwo, says one of the biggest challenges is getting a quick and reliable diagnosis. He spoke to VOA via Skype.
We're getting very close to a blood test that will highlight people in the early minutes to hours following a concussion.
Okonkwo says for now the diagnosis still relies on a subjective assessment of the patient, so a substantial number of concussions remain unrecognized and underdiagnosed. Since no two concussions are alike, Okonkwo says researchers also are working to improve the analysis of the injuries.
There has been a tremendous amount of effort in taking the neuroimaging strategies that we have today to take pictures of the brain and revolutionize them into modalities that are of much higher resolution and much better quality.
Researchers are also developing tools for testing patients for specific kinds of concussion, which can affect balance, vision, cognition, memory, or some other brain function. But Okonkwo says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
This has been another area of heavy investment, not just in the Department of Defense, but in professional sports leagues, as we search for ways to improve the safety for our military personnel, but also improve the safety of athletic endeavors.
Okonkwo says the ability to diagnose and understand the consequences of a concussion and to target treatment to an individual patient is much better than 10 years ago and ahead of public awareness of the advances. George Putic, VOA News, Washington.
Well, it is time now for a short break. Still ahead here on Africa 54, how a young Ethiopian immigrant is giving back to her country of birth. We'll be right back.
Make sure that we can turn that around, working jointly with the communities, with the private sector, and with government.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what is trending this Monday. Now, it may rain cats and dogs in Burma, but in Yangon, 2 coffee shops are offering animal lovers a chance to escape a monsoon as the global pet cafe craze sweeps into the rapidly changing city. Now, the trend, already popular in Asian capitals like Tokyo and Bangkok, is the latest international fad to sail into Myanmar since the end of junta rule in 2011 heralded a new era of freedom. Hip cafes and eateries have begun to mushroom across town to cater to an expanding middle class and growing population of expats. If you like shiny things, a dazzling array of gems and jewelry is on display at the India International Jewelry Show. India is one of the biggest exporters of gems and jewelry, with more than 500,000 large and small manufacturers and traders in the business, with the gems and jewelry sector witnessing wide-ranging changes in consumer preferences. Major market players are playing around with new designs, textures and materials. Jewelry makers say fluctuations in the gold market are part of a wider trend. They reflect the slowdown in the global economy and a decline in the demand for luxury goods. And finally, never mind smartphones, how about smart shoes? A Japanese electrical engineer has created, wait for it, LED footwear called ORF that have become glowing computer displays. But there is a catch. The high-tech footwear boasts a whopping $400 price tag. The shoe's display can be controlled by a smartphone app. The LED shoes can be programmed to light up when you receive an email or message. Of course it can. They can also be tailored to give you directions, lighting up in certain areas that point you in the right direction to walk. And that is what's trending, the busiest shoes I've ever heard of. Well, a young Ethiopian immigrant who has spent most of her life in the United States has found a way to give back to her country of birth. VOA's Amber Wishi has more.
Bags boasting the colors of the Ethiopian flag are being stuffed with medical supplies and donated clothes. The 100 bags will be hand-delivered to people in Ethiopia's capital. College student Tracy Demis made it all possible. She immigrated to the United States from Ethiopia at the age of 6 and has now launched the Ethiopia Lijoch Project. The name translates to Children of Ethiopia. The country is her motherland, and Demis feels that it's her duty to give back to her people, especially children.
These children are worrying about what food they're gonna have or what clothes they're gonna wear.
About 30% of Ethiopia's 100 million people live in poverty. Demis says her parents always helped those in need, and she is carrying on that tradition. She flew to Ethiopia this month to personally distribute her bags. Half will be given to those on the streets of Addis Ababa, and the other half donated to shelters. Demis received help from Project WISE, an American-based organization that empowers millennial immigrants.
This project means a lot to me because I want to make a real impact, especially in Africa and those who are less fortunate and don't have the opportunity as we do in America.
Though this is Demis's first time traveling to Ethiopia for the project, she plans on making this an annual event. Amber Wishi, VOA News, Washington.
And that is our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, of course, you can tune into VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC. That's Monday through Friday. Thank you so much for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a very good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. When something loses its original shape or form, it does not look very natural or comfortable.
Bent out of shape.
Hey, did you tell Greg about my dinner party?
Yeah, I did. I thought he was invited.
Well, now he's all bent out of shape because I didn't invite him.
I'm sorry.